Don't know if you noticed, but Resident Evil 4 is being remade, which we've known for a couple of years now. Nevertheless, it looks really great. I loved the confidence Capcom showed by revealing the release date before the game itself, and I think that says a lot about how they're approaching this remake. Ever since its inception in 2017, the RE engine has only gotten better. It looks gorgeous, but something I really dislike about almost all the Resident Evil games in that engine is that their colour is very... That's not to say it's a problem necessarily. It makes sense for the tone of survival horror. RE7's colour palette in particular is very restricted and other aspects of the engine are just stellar. But then you look at Resident Evil 3 and whoa, look at the colour of Raccoon City streets. For as horrific as the scene is, those elegant neon signs provide a beautiful juxtaposition between the horror of an apocalypse and... well, the horror of urban life. I love it. The entire game isn't like this though. At points it falls victim to those repulsive green filters some games use. I really don't get the appeal of it. Green filters can ruin a scene, they're awful. But RE4 seems like it'll be the best looking Resident Evil yet. We have this dark blue tone in what seems to be the early hours of the morning to make this place feel cold and hostile as we travel towards the village. Then during the day, the colours of autumn are shown in this radiant version of the village. I know some people don't like the filters, but to me, this new tone is a huge improvement over the original's brown and grey. I understand why the sepia colours were used back in 05, but for me, they're a stain on what is otherwise a visual style which hasn't aged a day. I think these colours also just work a lot better for the new game's attempts to bring Resident Evil 4 into survival horror. That said, I completely understand why a lot of people are being very cautious. Good looking visuals don't lead to a good game, and it was only a couple years ago that they handed off development of the RE3 remake to another studio and sliced off vast chunks of that game's content. It's honestly baffling that they decided to radically change that game for the worse, especially after how outstanding the RE2 remake was just 1 year prior. But I have faith in Capcom. Maybe it's misplaced, but I really do have faith that whatever the Resident Evil 4 remake will end up being, it will be treated with even more care than RE2's remake was. In fact, it almost feels like they've been building up to remaking RE4. Resident Evil 4 is a big game, almost twice as big as Village was, so it's going to be a monumental task for them to get it right. I can't help but think that Village was an experiment, taking fragments of ideas from RE4 and recompiling them into a different game while polishing the real deal. Think about just how many elements 4 and Village share. A village, surprisingly, a boat section with a big fish monster, a castle with a comically sized villain, one-liners that are so bad they're good. It's practically a rip-off of RE4, how could they do this? I very much doubt that they made Village so they could eventually make an asset flip remake. To me, it seems like they were instead testing the waters for new ideas in order to get this next one just right because, well, it's Resident Evil 4. With that said, modern Resident Evil is very different to what the franchise was in 2005. RE4 sparked the shift that brought the series towards action, but today it's pretty strictly survival horror. RE4 was a very tense game, but I wouldn't call it horror. From the very little we know about the remake, they're putting it more in line with the modern titles by focusing on scares, but how will that work? There's nothing particularly frightening about roundhouse kicking and suplexing the Spanish. The RE2 remake had very tight, claustrophobic corridors and it was extremely easy to get overwhelmed by zombies. You have to play that game cautiously, making a rash decision and the tyrant might come stomping around the corner. RE4 lets you be on the offensive. You're given so many options in terms of weapons, loadout and grenades that you can really approach any encounter however you like. Leon feels almost unstoppable and is completely unrecognisable from the rookie we played as in Raccoon City. I assume the remake is mostly built on the framework previous RE Engine games have built up. Hell, Leon looks exactly like an older version of his RE2 remake self. With the way that they've said they're keeping the essence of the original game, I really hope they count suplexes as part of the original's essence, but I really don't know. In the recent titles, the majority of the intense action is either heavily scripted or just not very good. I mean, you can weapon switch if you really want to, but compared to Leon's acrobatics, there's nothing. Even if we can't perform them, there's no way there isn't at least one suplex in a cutscene, right? Going back to Leon looking a bit older than his remake self, Nick Apostolidis seems to be voicing him again, and I'm really happy about that. There are approximately 36,000 voice actors for each of the characters in this series, so I can only hope we have some consistency now. That brings about another concern though, doesn't it? RE4's voice acting is legendary. Those terrible, terrible one-liners are a fundamental part of the Resident Evil 4 experience, and make the game legitimately really funny.
Very important question. You got a smoke?
Got gum.
I wouldn't call it the pinnacle of acting, but the way each line is delivered makes the script exponentially funnier. Right hands, ballistics, bingo, these are some of the most recognisable quotes in gaming because they are so perfect. Leon seems to be a bit of an edgy boy this time around with some kind of trauma. I can't possibly imagine why that's the case, which understandably set off a lot of alarm bells for some people. With the remake taking a more serious tone, more in line with the modern titles, the humour could be lost. The tone of the game overall is very campy and I love it. That's core to the series' identity, but they need to be so careful with the voice acting. You can have camp while being serious. One of my favourite franchises is the definition of tonal whiplash, where 1 second you're asking, what fresh hell is this? And 10 minutes later, why has the resolution gone all cloudy? Point is, they don't have to stray that far away from the humour of the original because, if done carefully, RE4 Remake could easily have a blend between the haha funnies and the serious tone that works better for horror. Either way, they can't fully escape the campy nature because the plot is literally to save the president's daughter. Come on. Besides, Resident Evil has always been a goofy series, even recently. Remember in 7 when you had a chainsaw fight with Jack? Remember in 3 when you get chased by a giant rolling head? Remember in Village when you fight a giant metal monster? Remember when they gave Mr. X a hat? Well, they've given Mendes a hat, so really this is Game of the Year. Maybe the giant Salazar mech wouldn't be massively out of place compared to these. Might not chase you in the same way, but I do think it'll still be there in some form, even if it's just a motionless statue. As for the one-liners, I can't say for sure. Village has a lot of one-liners, though not quite as memorable as RE4's, but they are there, so I don't think they're that against their characters saying stupid things. The Oculus Quest 2 version, and I will forever call this Oculus, you scum, cut out a few lines like the ballistics one and when Leon flirts with Hunnigan. Apparently this was Facebook's doing, so maybe they'll be in the remake, I don't know. Even if all the humour is gouged out, I still am hopeful that everything else makes up for that. Ironically enough, after RE3 had lost a lot of content from the original, the RE4 remake seems to be adding back in content. Leon's jacket looks a lot closer to its beta design, as does Ashley's outfit. That's something that I really love about remakes. It's not exactly nostalgia baiting like Green Hill Zone returning yet again because these are obscure changes but they mean everything. If there's one area that RE3 was faithful, it was its music. As much as I loved the RE2 remake, I don't think anyone would disagree that its music or lack thereof was massively disappointing. The original game has some iconic pieces of music like the RPD's main hall and the save room music, but most of it is just gone in the remake. The save room music is especially frustrating because save rooms are an essential component of the Resident Evil experience. It is so tense wandering through the halls of the Spencer Mansion or the RPD or the Baker Estate until all that tension is instantly released once you discover a save room. It's not always a profoundly comfortable track, but compared to the ominous sounds of the surrounding halls, it is a godsend. In the remake of 2, however, there's a new track that's actually pretty good, but it only plays a single time in only some of the save rooms and then never again. It feels like it completely misses the point of having a save room. RE3, however, despite not being particularly scary, nails the music. Not only do you actually get to hear it, but it sounds just like how you'd expect an updated version of the originals to sound. The best part is that when you go into the RPD as Carlos, that save room which was so unsatisfying in RE2 actually has the original Resident Evil 2 theme. RE3's music is a love letter to fans. It's actually taken directly from the 1999 Biohazard Orchestra concert. That is so cool. If they were willing to do that after seeing the backlash against RE2's new score, much like a save room, that makes me feel so relieved. TLDR, I can't wait to see them butcher Serenity. In terms of actual gameplay, it's hard to know exactly what's going to change. One thing that has been said is that its controls will be updated to a modern standard. RE4 had tank controls which worked extremely well for maintaining the stressfulness of the game. You can never get a full understanding of everything surrounding you because of the tight camera and slow turn. You can't shoot and move at the same time. You can't reload and move at the same time. As powerful as Leon's kicks are, he still can't charge through the Ganados. The only problem with these controls that I have at least is that they haven't aged amazingly. They were revolutionary at the time, no doubt, and still work well, but they aren't as polished as modern titles, making it hard to go back to. Not to mention the PC version's horrendous default binds. What are these? The remake will presumably be similar to RE2 and 3, but I can only hope it's a little bit faster, seeing as Leon's much more of a professional this time around. I'm not at all against new controls, but I know a lot of people will be, so let's just see how this goes. And let's face the facts, stuff is going to get cut. I've been closely following a lot of discussion after the reveal, and I've seen a lot of people suggest everything is going to be cut. Some people think Salazar will be entirely cut. That confuses me because he's such an important part of the castle section. He's more than a comic character. Some people think Krauser will be cut and the knife will become a consumable again like RE2. The knife is such an important part of Leon's arsenal that I really doubt it'll have durability again. Also, the knife is part of the best lines in the game, so you know. Some people think Dr. Salvador will be cut despite him being one of the most memorable parts of the game. Have you seen the European box art? Some people think the bloody merchant's gonna get cut. What? I don't even need to explain how preposterous that would be. Personally, I don't think entire areas are going to be cut, though I do think big chunks of levels will be. The island at the end is the only part that drags on for far too long though. At that point, the action is turned up from 11 to 42, so that'll probably be shortened. Beyond that, I'm not so sure. One of the best aspects of RE4 is that it's constantly throwing new stuff at you, so not having as many areas could really hurt the game. I'm sure Capcom knows that, but seeing how video games are just more expensive nowadays, and again after the RE3 remake, who knows? I wouldn't be massively upset if certain parts are gone. The original RE4 is still there. Yeah, that's a cop-out, but this game has been released quite literally a dozen times. With a lot of remakes, such as the Pokemon Gen 4 remakes, Demon Souls, the Yakuza Kiwamis, or of course Resident Evil 2 and 3, the originals are stuck on old hardware and the new ones have become the definitive versions, unfortunately. Even if the remake ends up being the greatest thing ever created, it will still never replace the original. I have hope in this project. It's Resident Evil 4. Like, the Resident Evil 4. Everyone has played it because it's so accessible and almost everyone loves it. I think remakes can bring an excellent opportunity to take something that already exists and transform it into something brand new, injecting life into an old classic. I think it would have been a much greater risk if they just tried to recreate Resident Evil 4 1-to-1. Look at what happened with the Demon Souls remake. It's basically exactly the same as the 2009 game, except they renamed sticky white stuff and arguably ruined the atmosphere in a lot of areas. No matter how hard they try, they'd never be able to exactly recapture the magic of the original. It was lightning in a bottle. Maybe it would have been better to explicitly say what this game is. Call it RE4 Reimagined or some other subtitle to keep it distinct, I don't know. Capcom knows how important it is to get Resident Evil 4 right. But I could be completely wrong. Perhaps this game will see massive cuts, and maybe I've underestimated just how much the goofy humour and tank controls make RE4 RE4. But I really do think leaning more into the survival horror aspect will result in a really fun game. I do agree that it's sort of a shame we continue to get remakes rather than completely fresh ideas in this industry, but let's face it, this game's been Capcom's cash cow for nearly 2 decades. Remaking it was going to be an inevitability, because that's just how our world works. So rather than whine and complain about how it's not the same as it once was, if the developers are confident in what they're making, then I want to embrace this new take of Resident Evil 4. I think that's what Leon meant with those lines at the end of the trailer. Capcom is directly speaking to us about how this remake will play out. This time, it can be different. It has to.